Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Good morning, and welcome to the program. I'm anxious to continue our reading and discussion now of the book Codeword Barbelon, Antichrist is a Woman, Alive and Well Again by P.D. Stewart, speaking of the Vatican Jesuit-led New World Order. This book is book 2 of a 2-book series that I highly recommend, most highly recommend, and I hope my listeners will value this program this morning and see in it a need for this book, that you may purchase it either new or used, and that you may get it expeditiously and read it for yourself and share it with friends and family. This is one of the best exposures of the Vatican Jesuit-led New World Order that I've read to date. I consider it one of my most important books in my library. We're going to continue now with the beginning of Chapter 5 of the book. It's entitled The World Political Authority, The Last Tango Dance. Now remember, previous chapters we've discussed that the Vatican called for a world political authority as a solution to the world economic crisis. What does the Pope have up his sleeve? This chapter begins with a quote from Franklin Delano Roosevelt, former President of the United States, 33rd degree Freemason, one of the greatest traitors of this country. He said, "In politics, nothing happens by accident. If it happens, you can bet it was planned that way." And full well, Franklin Delano Roosevelt knew precisely of what he spoke about. The author begins, "Let us return to the Pope's call for a world political authority." The Reuters article of July 7, 2009 continued, quote, "The Pope said every economic decision had a moral consequence and called for, quote, forms of redistribution of wealth overseen by governments to help those most affected by the crises." This was reported in the UK Reuters.com article. The citation is given in the book. You can look this article up for yourself and read it. He said again, the Pope said every economic decision had a moral consequence and called for forms of redistribution of wealth overseen by governments to help those most affected by the crises. So the governments of the world are going to oversee the redistribution of the world's wealth as a remedy for this global economic crisis. And to enforce it is going to take a global political entity. And now we're going to discover what that global political entity is. Obviously, said the Pope, it would have to have the authority to ensure compliance with its decisions from all parties, and also with the coordinated measures adopted in various international forums. That's from the same article by Reuters. The Pope said it would have to have this world political authority would have to have the authority to ensure compliance with its decisions from all parties, and also with the coordinated measures adopted in various international forums. So there are international forums all over the world set up to organize this new global political authority. Now, commenting on the Pope's encyclical, Caritas in Veritate, which we've spoken of voluminously on this program, Professor Miller of Andrews University writes, quote, "The letter makes clear that the policies carried out by this entity, this world political authority, would be to construct a social order that conforms to the moral order," unquote. Professor Miller adds, quote, The Pope's choice of words is telling. He does not say some moral order or a moral order, but the moral order, unquote. He clearly, that is, the Pope clearly has a certain moral order in mind. Could this be in any other moral order than the one articulated and taught by the Roman Catholic Church? Ladies and gentlemen, the world is going to become Catholic. It's going to have the help of the kings of the earth and these other international forums to bring it all about. And associated with this Catholicization, not only of the United States of America, but the world, will be a new economic and a new social system. The world is undergoing a radical change. And the Bible predicted all of this. We're seeing it unfolding right before our very eyes. Call your friends and family. Tell them to listen to Inquisition Update. Tell them to get a copy of this book, Codeword Barbelon by P.D. Stewart. Read it. Study it. Look up the resources that are cited and that are cited in this book, and see for yourself that this man knows what he's talking about. He continues, he says, the actual governing and wielding of the sword or rifle or bayonet of the global authority might be by non-religious state powers. Now, this is consistent with history. Since the Vatican doesn't have its own army, it recruits the kings of the earth to enforce Roman Catholic canon law. That defines all of history. That can't be debated or argued. That's clear history. That the civil power has always upheld the Pope's spiritual and temporal power in the world. He simply controls the kings of the earth, and the kings of the earth commit their power and strength, that is, the power and the strength of their nations, their economic strength, their military strength, and every other kind of strength, plus the blood and guts of their own people, to go out and enforce papal decrees, Roman Catholic canon law in the world. That's not new. That's as old as the Holy Roman Empire itself, nearing 2,000 years of existence. Now, he continues, but it would seem that the Pope must envision that they would do so with some connection with the Roman Catholic Church leadership or teaching, or both, unquote. So this global authority, this non-religious state power, that is the kings of the earth, who give all their power and strength unto the beast, must do so with some connection with Roman Catholic Church leadership or teaching, or both, unquote. It's about as concise as you can make it. The New World Order is a revival of the Old World Order, and the Pope is the head of it all. And that makes him the biblical Antichrist. Now, note, reader, the Pope did not call for a world financial authority, quote, to manage the global economy, unquote, but for a, quote, world political authority, unquote. Why does a financial crisis require a world political authority? Why not just call for a global financial regulation? What does the Pope have in mind? We have many financial crises of epic proportions in the last 60 years, and we've recovered without the imposition of a, quote, world political authority, unquote. So why the need? No, why the urgent need for one now? What gives this Pope the authority, the confidence to call for such a world political authority? And why do the leaders of the whole world and the media set up and listen when an old German priest wearing ancient robes and a fish mitre makes such declarations? Could any other religious leader have made such a statement and get serious attention? But Pope Benedict XVI was not finished. He added, quote, "It," that is his proposed world political authority, would have to have authority to ensure compliance with its decisions from all parties. And this quote is taken from an article entitled "Pope Calls for New World Financial Order" from the Associated Press. Okay, this was reported in the mainstream media that the Pope proposes this new world political authority, that it must have in authority to ensure compliance with its decisions from all parties. That's every man, woman, and child on the planet. Now, who is going to set up this true world political authority, and by what democratic mandate will it be established? Are the citizens of the world going to be allowed to vote in deciding whether or not they want such a world political authority? Or is this authority going to be imposed on us at the fiat direction of the Pope and his proxies of the G8 and the G20 nations? In his best-selling book, The Keys of This Blood, Jesuit professor Malachi Martin revealed who the Vatican says will be in control of this world political authority. Listen to what this Jesuit priest says. Quote, "Willing or not, ready or not, we are all involved in an all-out, no-holds-barred, three-way global competition. Most of us are not competitors. We are the stakes. The competition is about who will establish the first one-world system of government that has ever existed in the Society of Nations. It is about who will hold and wield the dual power of authority and control over each of us as individuals and over all of us together as a community, over the entire 6 billion people expected to inhabit the earth in the third millennium. The competition is all out because now that it has been started, there's no way it can be called off. Our way of life as individuals and as citizens, even the badges of our national identities, will have been powerfully and radically altered forever. No one can be exempted from its effects. No sector of our lives will remain untouched. The chosen purpose of John Paul II's pontificate, the engine that drives his papal grand policy, that determines his day-to-day, year-by-year strategies, is to be the victor in that competition now well underway." Unquote. John Paul II was chosen for the purpose to create this one world order. And the author recommends that we now read Revelation chapter 13, verses 16 and 17 to see its prediction in the Bible. The second beast, the wilderness beast, the one that stood up in the wilderness in the sparsely populated area of the world, the United States of America, the New World, as we've come to call it, is causing the whole world to worship the first beast, that which sprang up out of the sea of humanity, the populated area of the world, the old world order, the Holy Roman Empire. The United States is causing the whole world to worship the first beast, that is the papacy. We're creating a global image of the old Holy Roman Empire where the Pope ruled supreme. There can be little debate about this anymore. You either comprehend this or you don't. That's the conclusion I get from multitudes of discussions like these over amateur radio and privately in emails. People either accept this as the true interpretation of Revelation 13 or they don't. There doesn't seem to be a gray area. But I dare say there's no other candidate on the face of the planet that even comes close to what God has predicted to be the beast of Revelation chapter 13, but the Vatican, but the papacy. Now, continuing, it says on page 341 of the same book, The Keys of This Blood by Jesuit priest Malachi Martin. Martin states that this one world government will be, quote, dominated by an international bureaucracy. For instance, a world political authority which controls and directs every citizen and every nation. Martin adds coolly, it will be a winner-take-all race as to who will control this world political authority. These quotes are taken from the book The Keys of This Blood, page 12 through 16. And as we've already read, the Vatican intends to be not a partner, but the victor in that competition. The three-way competition between the papacy, the Soviet Union, and the industrialized West, the competition that Pope John Paul II put into motion and proclaimed that he would be the victor in that competition, that he would be the first to head a global government. Now, on page 16, Malachi Martin tells us confidently, quote, those of us under 40 will surely live under its legislative, executive, and judicial authority and control. A system that will be introduced and installed in our midst by the end of this final decade of the second millennium, unquote. That's now, reader. We are in the third millennium. That's now. We are in the third millennium. This author is telling us in the most explicit terms the New World Order is already in existence. It's already up and running. We've just not been told about it. In calling for the establishing of a true world political authority, the Pope says this should be managed, quote, with God-centered ethics. And this quote is taken from Pope Calls for God-Centered Global Economy. It was printed by USA Today, July 7th, 2009. This new global political authority should be managed by God-centered ethics. The author writes, God-centered ethics? What is that? Reader, we should soon have opportunity to see what kind of ethics and religious values the Pope really espouses. But he hints at the answer to his question himself. His encyclical makes it very clear that to have a sound global economy, every responsibility and commitment, quote, must be rooted in the values of Christian truth, unquote. That from the same article by USA Today, July 7th, 2009. What Christian truth do you think the papacy is talking about? He's talking about Roman Catholic truth. That's Roman Catholic canon law. That's Roman Catholic papal encyclicals and bulls and pastoral letters. This is the philosophy, religious and political and social and economic philosophies of the papacy being imposed on the world without vote, without comment, without question. That's the New World Order. It's Roman Catholic canon law being imposed upon the world. Roman Catholic social doctrine being imposed upon the world. Roman Catholic economic order being established by the papacy, by the kings of the earth, without consulting the people. This is Nicolaitanism on steroids. This is nuclear Nicolaitanism. This is the New World Order. This is what God predicted. And we're to have none of it. We're to have nothing to do with it, except to expose it for what it is. A global government by the biblical and historical Antichrist. Now, the author continues, he says, commenting on this papal declaration, Professor Miller, previously quoted, says, quote, "It cannot be that the Pope is calling for the creation of an authority and the implementation of a social and moral order, and then he plans to have no rule or say in how it is implemented," unquote. So the inference is clear from Professor Miller that the Pope's going to be the head of this, that he is calling for. He's calling for it, and he's going to be the head of it. And the kings of the earth know it. And these international forums know it. The rich ruling elite, that is the priesthood and their landholders, that is the kings of the earth, all know it. They're just not telling us. They're reducing us to papal serfdom. They're making us slaves to the modern-day Pharaoh. They're going to make us bow the knee to the modern-day Nebuchadnezzar and his image. That's the New World Order. He said the Catholic hierarchy, that is the Holy See of the Roman Catholic Church, the Holy See, the Vatican, has had for many years, quote, a concerted plan, unquote, for a new, quote, world political authority. And what did he just tell us? The very purpose of the papacy is to establish a world political authority. That's the very purpose. Isn't that what is proclaimed by the papacy as being the quote-unquote self-arrogated seat of Peter? The replacement of the Son of God? The vicar of Christ? And that all power is vested in the breast of the Pope? That he, not Christ, is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords? That the earth belongs to the Pope and all the fullness thereof as Christ's replacement on earth? This is the very purpose for the creation of the papacy. This was Satan's business in creating the papacy. The Bible plainly tells us that it is the dragon that gives him his power and seat and great authority. Listen what it says. The Catholic hierarchy, that is the bishops, the priests, and the cardinals, and the popes, the Holy See, the legal entity of the Vatican, has had for many years, quote, a concerted plan, unquote, for a new, quote, world political authority, unquote. What we read just before the break, the Catholic hierarchy, that is the Holy See, has had for many years, quote, a concerted plan, unquote, for a new, quote, world political authority, unquote. Now, is that just anti-Roman Catholic bigotry to make the assertion that the Pope has had for many years a plan to rule the world? Is that just anti-Roman Catholic bigotry? Is that just slander of the papacy, as many of my Roman Catholic critics would assert? No, this comes directly from papal encyclicals, the highest form of communication the papacy ever utters. Papal encyclicals that are written under the character of infallibility. When the Pope speaks ex cathedra, he speaks infallibly, according to Roman Catholic dogma. These are papal encyclicals. They are bound by infallibility. They must be believed by the quote-unquote faithful, pain of excommunication. No one may contradict the papacy when he speaks infallibly. It is as if it were God himself speaking. These are Roman Catholic documents. These are not Protestant documents. These are papal encyclicals. There are 5 of them. The author says we need only look at the Vatican's own documents. Rerum Novarum, the encyclical of Pope Leo XIII, dated the 15th of May of 1891, which this author is going to discuss a great deal more later in the book. Another encyclical entitled Quadragesimo Anno. Another encyclical entitled Mater et Magistra. Another one, Papalorum Progressio. And the Pastoral Constitution, Gaudium et Spes. Okay, I've done the best I can to pronounce these. You can look them up for yourselves, read what they say. Obviously, you'll have to find an English translation of them because they're written in the dead language of Latin. And here is what these encyclicals say under the heading, quote, State Intervention and the Economy, unquote. State Intervention and the Economy, as summarized in the document, quote, the social agenda. So the popes have written about the world's social agenda, and they've also written about how the states are going to intervene. That is, the nations are going to intervene regarding the economy. Remember, the kings of the earth give their power and strength unto the beast. Now here's paragraph 229. Another task of the state, remember this is the enforcement wing of the whole Holy See, the states, the nations, the secular power. Another task of the state is that of overseeing and directing the exercise of human rights in the economic sector, supporting them in moments of crisis. The state has the further right to intervene when particular monopolies create delays or obstacles to development, unquote. This is a citing from Centissimus Annus, another papal writing, and here is paragraph 237 of the Socialist Agenda, which states, quote, the principle of subsidiarity is opposed to all forms of collectivism, that is, socialism. It aims at harmonizing. It tends toward the establishment of true international order, unquote. And this is a citation taken from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, 1885. Now, reader, that statement was made in 1885. This international order has long been the grand design of the papacy. As I just asserted earlier, the papacy was created to rule the world in Christ's stead. That is the official teaching of the Roman Catholic Church. It has been the intent of the papacy from the get-go. The grand design of the papacy is an international order, a global kingdom for the Pope. King of kings and Lord of lords. And the papacy for 2,000 years has been working incrementally to that end. And this explains all the wars of the world, all the financial crises of the world, all the inquisitions, all the crusades, all the holocausts, all the economic crises, including this one. Remember, Franklin Delano Roosevelt said, nothing happens in politics unless it was planned that way. He was a 33rd degree Jesuit-controlled Freemason, and when he uttered those words, he knew only certain people would understand what he says. I want you to understand what he meant. In paragraph 239, we read, again from these papal encyclicals, quote, in order to be fully effective, these efforts ought not remain scattered or isolated. much less be in competition for reasons of power or prestige. The present situation calls for the concerted planning. Calls for concerted planning. A planned program is, of course, better and more effective than occasional aid left to individual goodwill. It proposes careful selection of ends and the choice of means. Remember, the ends justify the means. To meet the needs of the present and the demands of the foreseeable future. More important, a concerted plan has advantages that go beyond the field of economic growth and social progress, shaping the world, unquote. From Papalorum Progressio, number 50. And paragraph 341 of the Social Agenda states, quote, international collaboration on a worldwide scale requires institutions that will prepare, coordinate, and direct it until finally there is established an order which is universally recognized. We encourage these organizations which have undertaken this collaboration, as we said to the representatives of the United Nations in New York. Again, from Papalorum Progressio, number 78. Now remember that Pope Benedict has already called for a, quote, true world political authority, unquote, that is to be, quote, universally recognized, unquote, and this is the very expression used in the encyclical of Pope Paul VI in 1967, where he said, quote, this international collaboration on a worldwide scale requires institutions that will prepare, coordinate, and direct it until finally there is established an order of justice which is universally recognized. Again, from Papalorum Progressio, paragraph 78. Under the subheading Globalization on paragraph 358 of the Social Agenda, it states, quote, if an authentic or true economic order is to be established on a worldwide basis, an end will have to be put to national ambitions, unquote. Now, what do you suppose the Pope meant when he said to put an end to national ambitions? Well, certainly you can't have a unified global government if there are competing national entities. In other words, the United States, as we've known it, is ceasing to exist. We're part of a global community now. We just live on Vine Street. Europe lives on McKinley Street. No more national boundaries. You can't have a cohesive new world order, a global government, a global religion, a global economic system, a global social order when people protect national sovereignties and demand national constitutions and a separate set of laws than Roman Catholic canon law. All that has to be destroyed. That's the intent of the Pope. The author says, reader, national ambitions? Thus, when Pope Benedict called for a world political authority rooted in Christian values, you can interpret that to mean Catholic values, more particularly Roman Catholic canon law and tradition, regulated by law, universally recognized, and vested with the effective power, that is to make every man, woman, and child on the planet comply, he's calling for the setting up of a totalitarian world system of power, the union of church and state on a geopolitical scale. Civitas Dei, the Commonwealth of God. The Commonwealth of God, they call it. In Christ's absence. There's no other way to describe this than a counterfeit kingdom of Christ. That's what the Pope is calling for. A counterfeit kingdom of Christ. And if you're sitting in an ecumenical church that seeks peace and unity with the Pope and his church, and you're sharing in mutual effort on certain concerns, you're just being conditioned for complete control by the Roman Catholic Church in the creation of a quote-unquote commonwealth of God, a city of God. They call it the city of God, when in actual fact it is the kingdom of Antichrist. Now, Robert Mueller, former Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations, said, quote, listen to this, we must move as quickly as possible to a one-world government, a one-world religion, under a one-world leader. This was a quote taken from Lincoln Bloomfield in a work entitled A World Effectively Controlled by the United Nations, Council on Foreign Relations under a contract number SCC 2827. Yes, the Council on Foreign Relations is all about creating a one-world government, a one-world economic system, and a one-world religion, all controlled by the Pope. That is what the Council on Foreign Relations is designed to do, to destroy all national boundaries, to destroy all national sovereignties, to throw us, Protestant USA, under the direct boot heel of the Pope. That's what the Council on Foreign Relations is all about. And it was put by the Council on Foreign Relations under a contract with the United States State Department, and this was dated in 1962. The document was never intended for public consumption. This city of God is known by our State Department and by the Council on Foreign Relations. Talked about openly between those two entities in a document that was never intended for public consumption. What do you think of that? Do you think there's any use going to the polls to vote in a political race in this country? This is just how corrupt our nation is. This is how corrupt our government is. They're not telling us what they're doing. Robert Mueller, former Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations, this is one of the Pope's governing bodies, one of those international forums we talked about earlier, one of the most powerful in the world. He says, quote, we must move as quickly as possible to a one-world government, a one-world religion, under a one-world leader. And who do you suppose that is? None other than the Pope of Rome, the biblical and historical Antichrist. The author says, who might such a man be? Former President of the General Assembly of the United Nations, Charles Malik, said, quote, the only hope for this Western world lies in a united Europe under the control of the Pope, unquote. Former President of the General Assembly of the United Nations, Charles Malik, said, the only hope for this Western world lies then in a united Europe under the control of the Pope, unquote. Why does Charles Malik assert this to be true? Because he says the Roman Catholic Church, quote, is the most commonly influential, controlling, unifying element in Europe, unquote. And he's right. And not just in Europe, but the whole of the Western world. And where is that control? Where is that influence? Where is that unifying element in this part of the Western world? In the ecumenical evangeli-belly churches. That's how we're being sucked in to this global kingdom of Antichrist, this counterfeit commonwealth of God, they call it. In the churches. That's where it's coming from. They're talking about peace and unity. We've got to convert the world to Christianity. What a better endeavor could God's people be involved in? But they're not uniting us with Christ. They're not preparing for Christ's return. They're preparing to crown the Pope king of this world. Now, Lincoln Bloomfield wrote further, he said, quote, world government will come about through the establishment of supranational institutions characterized by mandatory universal membership and some ability to employ physical force. And you better believe they're going to use physical force just like Rome has always done to enforce her policies. And I believe they'll even use nukes if they have to. The papacy is going to celebrate her last hurrah. And the world is going, every eye is going to see, every knee is going to bow, and every tongue is going to confess that the Pope is Christ's vicar on earth, or they're going to die. That's the New World Order. And if you think I'm overstating this, if you think I'm just a rabid anti-Roman Catholic bigot, history will exonerate me. Because this is the strategy Rome has used throughout her history. Nothing that I am predicting defies what we already know to be true of history. The trouble is, they've just simply unwritten all that history out of our history books. Nobody's familiar with it anymore. And to make these claims sound absolutely outrageous to people who know nothing of history. Now, historian Henry Steele Camager wrote in, quote, the Declaration of Interdependence, a document signed by 32 senators and 92 representatives of the U.S. Capitol on January 30th, 1976, quote, 2 centuries ago, here's what he said. Now, this was signed by 32 senators and 92 representatives of the U.S. Capitol in 1976, quote, 2 centuries ago, our forefathers brought forth a new nation. Now we must join with others to bring forth a new world order. Narrow notions of national sovereignty must not be permitted to curtail that obligation. That again, from the World Affairs Council in Philadelphia of October 25th, 1975, endorsed by 124 members of the United States Congress, those who you elected to represent you in Washington, D.C., have signed it. They signed it. They endorse it. That we must move with expediency to go forward with this new world order, and that national sovereignty will not be permitted to curtail that obligation. Our elected officials have known and endorsed since 1976, at least, the intent to fold the United States of America, to give up all of its national sovereignty, and to put it into a global government ruled by the Pope. Here's a representation interjected in the text of this book with a caption underneath. There's a sword in one hand and what looks to be a rose or an olive branch in the other. And then it says underneath the banner, it says, peace, but if not consent, the sword. In other words, we're going to have peace in the world. You know, this New World Order is all about peace and unity, isn't it? Just like the ecumenical movement. Same byword. The same mantra. Peace and unity. No more war. They're going to have this peace, and if not by consent, than by the sword. And what does the Bible say? Peace, peace, when there is no peace. That's how the Pope achieves peace, by killing, by inquisition, by crusade, by massacre, by religious persecution, by economic sanction, by the rack, by the steel of the poniard, the leaden bullet, the poison cup, and the strangulation cord. Rome will rule this world by hook or by crook. The end justifies the means. There's an inquisition coming to former Protestant America that this world is not prepared to witness. And we've got one hope, and his name is Jesus Christ. The author continues, he says, the Jesuit professor Carroll Quigley, Bill Clinton's mentor, wrote, quote, in the New World Order, the individual's freedom of choice will be controlled within very narrow alternatives by the fact that he will be numbered from birth and followed as a number through his educational training, his required military or other public service, his tax contributions, his health and medical requirements, and his final retirement and death benefits. What do you suppose he was talking about? Well, as far as I'm concerned, he could be talking about nothing other than the Social Security card. Listen again, one of the most powerful, noteworthy, renowned Jesuit priests in this country, Carroll Quigley, professor at Georgetown University, one of the most powerful Jesuit universities in this country, a personal mentor, Bill Clinton's, said in the New World Order, the individual's freedom of choice will be controlled within very narrow alternatives by the fact that he will be numbered from birth and followed as a number through his educational training, his required military and other public service, his tax contributions, his health and medical requirements, and his final retirement and death benefits. How do you do any of these things? You have to tell them your Social Security number. He said, soon the world will be brought into such dire financial straits that almost all, excuse me, I'll begin again. Soon the world will be brought into such dire financial straits that almost all peoples will come to accept the proposition of Charles Malik. What was the proposition of Charles Malik? That if the West is going to survive, they have to unite under the power of the papacy. What proof do I offer in support of such bold assertions that the world is being intentionally brought into dire financial straits so that the unsuspecting peoples of the world will accept the new world political authority? Bill Clinton's Jesuit professor Quigley explained how this seemingly impossibility will be brought about with the support of the vast majority of the people of the world. The powers of financial capitalism and another far-reaching aim, nothing less to create a world system of financial control able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. And the Pope's leading the way. Now you know what the New World Order is. We'll talk about more tomorrow. Thanks for listening.